Welcome to the deep dive. You ever try to figure out what's going on in an industry and just end up totally lost?
Oh, yeah. Information overload, right? It's like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes.
Exactly. Like assembling flat pack furniture, but they forgot the little Allen key. Super frustrating. But hey, that's why we're here.
Right. We do the heavy lifting, sift through the dense stuff, and pull out the key insights you can actually use.
And today, we're diving into a source you pointed us to. It's a big one. Michael Porter's competitive strategy. Sounds a bit academic, maybe.
It can seem that way, but honestly, the ideas in it are, well, foundational. It's used everywhere in business schools and actual strategy work.
Yeah, the introduction even mentions how it sort of shifted economic thinking, made people look more at how companies actually, compete and make profit, not just abstract market forces.
Exactly. It really dug into company behavior. So
Yeah.
our mission today is to pull out the actionable stuff from this classic work, the insights you can apply, like right away to understand the competitive world around you.
Whether you're starting something new, figuring out your current market, or, I don't know, just want to sound smart,
Pretty much. Ready to jump in?
let's do it. Okay, so big picture first. What really drives competition in an industry? Porter gives us this famous framework, right? The five forces.
That's the one. It's chapter one stuff.
Yeah.
Really central. Think of it as the main pressures shaping how profitable an industry can be.
Okay, so what are these five pressures?
All right, you've got the threat of new entrants, basically. How easy is it for someone new to jump in and compete?
Okay, number one.
Then, the bargaining power of suppliers. How much control do the companies selling to the industry have?
Got it. Makes sense.
Number three is the flip side, the bargaining power of buyers. How much leverage do the customers have?
Okay.
Fourth, the threat of substitute products or services. Can customers just use something else entirely to get the same need met?
Right, like using video conferencing instead of flying somewhere.
Exactly. And fifth, the intensity of rivalry among the existing competitors. How fierce is the fight between the players already there?
So those five things together sort of define the competitive climate.
Pretty much. And the key thing Porter stresses is that the strength of these forces varies wildly. Think about, say, the tire industry versus high-end cosmetics. Very different competitive pressures, very different profit potential.
So understanding which forces are strongest in your industry is crucial.
Absolutely. The whole point of strategy, according to Porter, is finding a position where you can defend against these forces or maybe even shape them to your advantage.
Actionable insight right there. Think about an industry you know, maybe where you work. Which of those five forces feels like the biggest deal? Where's the pressure coming from?
Yeah, where are the weak spots or the opportunities? It's a great starting point for strategic thinking.
Okay, let's zoom in on one of those. The threat of new entrants. What stops new companies from just flooding into any profitable market? The book calls these barriers to entry, right?
Exactly. Chapter 1 lays these out. They're obstacles that make it tough or expensive for newcomers.
Like what? What's a big one?
Well, economies of scale is a classic. If existing companies produce huge volumes, their cost per item is lower. A newbie starting small just can't match that price easily.
So bigger is often cheaper to produce?
Generally, yeah. Though Porter notes it's not just manufacturing, it could be scale and distribution, R&D, whatever. But he also warns that focusing only on scale can make you inflexible if things change.
Right, get locked in. What's another barrier?
Product differentiation. Think brand loyalty. If customers love Apple, a new smartphone maker has a huge uphill battle, right? They need to spend massively on marketing just to get noticed, let alone convince people to switch.
Yeah, breaking through that existing loyalty is tough. What else?
Capital requirements. Some industries just need a ton of money to even get started. Building a car factory, developing a new drug, huge upfront investment.
So the sheer cost keeps people out.
Often, yes. Although, interestingly, the book mentions sometimes suppliers might actually help a new company get started if it means more business for them.
Huh. That's a twist. So the barrier isn't always absolute.
Not always. Then there are cost disadvantages that aren't about scale. Maybe an existing company has a patent on key technology, or they locked up the best source of raw materials years ago, like the Texas Gulf sulfur example in the book.
So unique advantages, not just size.
Exactly. Or maybe they just have more experience and know how to do things more efficiently. The learning curve effect.
Gotcha. What about getting the product to the customer?
Access to distribution channels. If the existing companies control the main ways to reach customers' shelf space in stores, relationships with distributors, a new player might struggle to even get their products seen.
Like trying to get a new cereal brand onto supermarket shelves next to Kellogg's?
Precisely.
Hmm.
You might have to offer big discounts or incentives just to get distributors to take a chance.
And the last one. Seems like there's always a government angle.
Yep. Government policy, regulations, needing licenses, safety standards, environmental rules.
Mm.
These can all create significant hurdles, especially in industries like banking or pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so a whole range of potential roadblocks for newcomers.
Right. So the actionable insight here is when you're looking at an industry, maybe thinking of entering or just analyzing competitors, you have to assess these barriers. How high are they? Which ones really matter? Can they be overcome?
Definitely key questions to ask.
Understanding these is fundamental.
All right, so we know the forces, we know what keeps newcomers out. How do companies already in the industry actually compete? Chapter 2 talks about generic strategies, right? 3 main ways.
Yeah. 3 fundamental approaches for achieving competitive advantage. Overall cost leadership, differentiation, and focus. Porter argues most successful companies lean heavily into one of these.
Cost leadership, differentiation, focus. Okay, let's take cost leadership first. Pretty obvious what that means.
Yeah, it's about being the lowest cost producer in the industry. This lets you either undercut competitors on price or maintain the average price and earn higher profits. Think Ryanair or maybe Aldi.
Right, super efficient, no frills.
Exactly. The book mentions examples like Briggs and Stratton, Lincoln Electric. It requires relentless focus on efficiency, cost control, lean operations.
And that gives them a buffer against those 5 forces, I guess. Like, even if buyers are powerful, the cost leader can still make money at lower prices.
Precisely. It provides protection, but there are risks. You might ignore quality or market changes because you're so focused on cost, and new technology could wipe out your cost advantage overnight. Think about Ford and the Model T, great cost leadership, but they missed the shift towards features and style.
Good point. Being cheap isn't everything forever. Okay, what about the second one? Differentiation.
Differentiation is about making your product or service seem unique and valuable to customers so they're willing to pay more for it.
So not competing on price, but on uniqueness.
It's exactly. Uniqueness and quality, features, design, brand image, customer service. Yeah. Think Apple again, or maybe a brand like Dyson. Customers perceive something special and pay a premium.
And this also protects against the 5 forces.
Yes, it builds customer loyalty, reduces their price sensitivity, creates barriers through that brand image. It provides insulation. But the book notes it often involves higher costs, R&D, marketing, better materials.
So there might be a trade-off. You can't always be super unique and super cheap.
Often there is. You might sacrifice some market share to maintain that premium position. Though some companies, like Caterpillar mentioned in the book, manage both differentiation and reasonable costs pretty well through things like their dealer network and service.
Interesting balance. Okay, the third one, focus. What's that about?
Focus is about concentrating on a specific, narrow segment of the market, a particular group of buyers, a limited part of the product line, or a specific geographic area.
So not trying to be everything to everyone.
Exactly. You serve that niche really, really well. You aim to achieve either a cost advantage within that niche or differentiation within that niche.
Like a company that only makes high-end hiking boots for extreme mountaineering.
Perfect example.
Oh.
They're not competing with Nike across the board. They're dominating a specific, narrow segment by meeting its needs perfectly.
Okay, so cost leadership, differentiation, or focus. But what if a company tries to do a bit of everything?
That's what Porter calls being stuck in the middle. And it's usually a recipe for disaster, or at least mediocrity.
Why is it so bad?
Because you don't have a clear advantage. You're not the cheapest, you're not the most unique, you're not the best specialist. Competitors who are clearly focused on one strategy will likely outperform you. The book even talks about a U-shaped curve. The most profitable firms are often the big cost leaders, or the focused differentiated players, while those in the middle with average market share struggle.
That makes a lot of sense. You need to commit to something.
Absolutely. Trying to be all things to all people usually means you end up being nothing special to anyone. It requires different resources, different skills, different cultures to pursue each strategy effectively.
Okay, super helpful. So we've got industry structure, generic strategies, but what about sizing up the actual companies you're competing against? Chapter 3 gets into competitor analysis, right?
Yes, absolutely critical. You can't just look at the industry, you have to understand the specific players. Porter says you need to analyze 4 key things about your competitors. their future goals, their assumptions, their current strategies, and their capabilities.
Goals, assumptions, strategy, capabilities. Okay, why are their goals important? Isn't it just about making money?
It's usually more nuanced than that. Is their goal rapid market share growth, even if it hurts profit short term? Or are they focused on cash flow for the parent company? Are they diversifying? Understanding their objectives helps you predict how they'll react. If you know a business unit is their star performer, attacking it directly might provoke a massive, maybe unexpected response.
Right, don't step on the toes of their prized possession. Good point. What about their assumptions? How do we figure those out?
This is about understanding their mindset. What do they believe about themselves, about the industry, about you? These assumptions can create blind spots. If a competitor firmly believes customers only care about X, but you see evidence they're starting to care about Y, that's an opportunity. The book uses the Miller Lite example. The big brewers assumed serious beer drinkers wouldn't touch light beer. Big mistake.
So finding their blind spots, what they take for granted.
Exactly. It can reveal where they're vulnerable or slow to react.
Okay, and then assessing their capabilities. What does that involve?
This is looking at their strengths and weaknesses across the board. Financial muscle, sure, but also things like marketing skill, R&D prowess, operational efficiency, the quality of their management team, their distribution network, even their ability to respond quickly to things. Are they agile or bureaucratic?
So what are they actually good at and where do they struggle?
Pretty much. And related to that is understanding their defensive capability.
Hmm.
How well can they protect their current position? What kind of strategic moves would hurt them most, or which ones would they find hardest to counter?
Finding their vulnerability.
Yes. It helps you choose where and how to compete more effectively. Don't attack their strongest point head on if you can find a weaker flank.
So the real actionable insight here is looking beyond just what competitors do and trying to figure out the why, the how, and the where they might be weak.
You got it. It's about building the deeper understanding to anticipate and strategize better.
Now, all this competing involves moves and countermoves. Companies don't operate in a vacuum. Chapter 4 talks about competitive moves and market signals. How do we read the signals?
Right, because companies are always communicating, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not. Reading these signals helps you understand intentions and avoid costly fights or missed opportunities.
What kind of signals? Like press releases?
That's one type. Prior announcements of moves, discussions about the industry outlook, even the way something is announced matters. A CEO making a statement in the Wall Street Journal carries more weight than a rumor on a blog.
Okay, so pay attention to how they communicate. But can't they just be bluffing?
Absolutely. Announcements can definitely be bluffs intended to scare off competitors or test the waters without full commitment. You have to weigh the announcement against their capabilities and past behavior.
The strategic bluff. Okay, what about how companies respond to moves?
Well, there's direct retaliation. They cut prices, you cut prices. Simple. But the book also highlights the cross parry.
Cross parry. Sounds like fencing.
Kind of. It's an indirect response. Maybe they attack you in market A, so you respond by putting pressure on them in market B, a market that's important to them. It's a way to signal back off without escalating the original fight directly.
Clever. A bit more strategic than just a tit for tat. What about not responding? Is that ever smart?
Sometimes, yes. The book points out situations where responding might be too costly, or maybe the competitor's move isn't actually that threatening long-term. Or perhaps they face a dilemma like the Swiss watchmakers initially ignoring Timex, or IBM facing the rise of mini-computers. Responding forcefully might have hurt their existing profitable business, but inaction has its own risks, obviously.
Yeah, you don't want to ignore a threat until it's too late. The book also mentions discipline.
Yeah, discipline is defense. Basically, making it clear that you will retaliate swiftly and surely against certain types of moves. If competitors know you'll immediately fight back hard against price cuts, for example, they might be less likely to start a price war. Using a fighting brand is one example, a lower-priced version, to specifically combat discount competitors.
So setting expectations. And what about commitment? Chapter 5 touches on that.
Commitment is huge. It's about making your strategic intentions credible and irreversible, or at least very costly to reverse. Building a huge new factory, signing long-term exclusive deals. These signal a strong commitment that forces competitors to take you seriously and adjust their own plans.
Makes sense. You put your money where your mouth is, basically.
Exactly. It reduces uncertainty and shapes the competitive game.
So pay attention to signals, Consider your response options carefully and make your own commitments clear. It's a dynamic dance.
A constant strategic dialogue, absolutely.
Okay, we've talked a lot about competitors, but what about the other key players? Chapter 6 looks at strategy towards buyers and suppliers. Why the separate focus?
Because your relationships with them are fundamental to your profitability. They aren't just passive participants. Their power directly impacts your bottom line. You need strategies for dealing with them, too.
Right, back to those five forces, essentially. Let's start with buyers. What makes them powerful?
Several things we touched on. If buyers are concentrated, meaning just a few large customers, buy most of your output, they have clout. If they buy in large volumes, if your product isn't very differentiated so they can easily switch, if their own switching costs are low, and if they have good information about your costs and alternatives.
So if you sell a standard product to just two massive customers who know exactly what it costs you to make it, you're in a weak position.
Pretty much, yeah. They can squeeze your prices. And you also need to consider their price sensitivity.
What drives that?
Things like autoses. How important is your product as a component of their final product or cost structure? How differentiated is your product? How much competition do they face? How profitable are they? Even who makes the decision within their company matters.
So it's complex. The book talks about buyer selection as a strategy.
Yes, don't just sell to anyone. Actively choose which buyers to target. Focus on those with good growth potential, maybe less bargaining power, lower price sensitivity, or who are simply cheaper for you to serve.
So you might actually fire a customer.
Potentially, yes. If a particular customer segment is very costly to serve and constantly beats you down on price, focusing your resources elsewhere might be smarter.
Interesting. And what about switching costs? How do we leverage those?
You want to increase the buyer's switching costs, subtly if possible. Integrate your product deeply into their processes, customize solutions, build strong relationships, offer loyalty perks. Make it inconvenient or costly for them to leave you for a competitor.
Make yourself sticky. Okay, let's flip to suppliers. What gives them power?
Very similar factors, just mirrored. Supplier concentration, are there only one or two suppliers for a critical input? How important is your business to them? How differentiated is their product? What are your costs if you switch suppliers? Can they credibly threaten to enter your business? Forward integration. Are there substitutes for what they supply?
So if you rely entirely on one company for a unique critical component, they hold the cards.
Absolutely. We see this all the time with supply chain issues. So
Yeah.
you need strategies to manage that power.
Like what can you do?
The book suggests things like spreading your purchases across multiple suppliers, qualifying alternative sources even if you don't use them immediately, standardizing the parts you buy so you can switch more easily, or in some cases, even vertical integration, making the component yourself.
Okay, so actively managing both sides of the chain. It's a constant negotiation, really.
It is. You're always trying to improve your bargaining position relative to both your customers and your suppliers.
Now, industries don't stand still, right? Chapter 8 tackles industry evolution. Why is this forward-looking view so important?
Because the competitive landscape is constantly shifting. The five forces change. New opportunities arise. Old strategies stop working. If you don't anticipate and adapt to these changes, you risk getting left behind. The book notes that reacting late gets progressively more expensive.
So you need to have your eye on the horizon. How do you analyze this evolution?
Porter suggests going back to the five forces again. Ask, how is each force likely to change in the future? Will entry barriers go up or down? Will buyer power increase? Will rivalry intensify or lessen?
Looking for the trends shaping the forces. What kind of big trends drive these changes?
Lots of things. Changes in the overall industry, growth rate markets mature, growth slows. That changes the competitive dynamic. Technological change is obviously huge. New products, new ways of producing things. Think how streaming changed music and video.
Massive disruption.
Huge. Also, knowledge spreads, patents expire, secrets get out. Buyers become more sophisticated and knowledgeable over time. Input costs change, labor, materials, energy, exchange rates shift. Government policies evolve, deregulation, new environmental standards, trade agreements, and sometimes established firms from other industries decide to jump in, bringing new resources and changing the game.
Wow, okay, so a lot of potential drivers of change to track. The book also mentions different challenges depending on whether an industry is emerging, growing, mature, or declining.
Yeah, chapters 9 through 12 go into those specific stages. Each has its own typical strategic issues. Definitely material for another dive.
Sounds like it. But the key takeaway for now is be aware.
Be aware and be analytical. What stage is your industry in? What are the key trends pushing it forward or holding it back? How might these changes affect the 5 forces, and your strategic options. Don't just focus on today. Think about where the industry is heading.
So, wrapping this up, it feels like Porter's framework gives us a really powerful toolkit. It's not just theory, it's about dissecting how competition actually works.
Exactly. It helps you move from just reacting to actually thinking strategically about industry structure, competitive positioning, rivals, buyers, suppliers, the whole ecosystem.
And the key is applying it, right? Like pick an industry you're interested in.
Yeah, try mapping out the 5 forces for it.
Hmm.
Who seems to be the cost leader? Who's differentiating? Are there focused players?
Think about a key competitor. What do you guess their goals are? What assumptions might they be making? Where are they strong or weak?
And watch the signals. What are companies announcing? How are they reacting to each other? Think about the power balance with customers and suppliers in that industry.
And finally, don't forget evolution. What's the next big wave or disruption likely to be in that space? How might that change everything?
It's a continuous process of analysis and adaptation. So maybe the final thought to leave folks with is, looking at your own industry or one you follow closely, what's the single most powerful competitive force right now? And is that force likely to get stronger or weaker in the next 5 years?
Ooh, good question to ponder. Really makes you think about the long game.
Definitely encourage folks to go deeper into the source material if this sparked their interest. There's a lot more richness there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into competitive strategy. Hope you found it useful.
Yeah, hope I gave you some practical tools.
We'll be back soon with another one.
Yeah.
Until then, keep analyzing.